You just want to count me in again? Okay. That was good. All right, welcome back. My name is still Brian Steed, and I'm still the director of the Utah Department of Natural Resources. I get the distinct pleasure of being up here twice, which, you know, I really couldn't be more pleased about. And if you couldn't tell from the previous panel, all of these topics are things that I think all of us feel quite passionately about. And we couldn't be more pleased to be able to share kind of some of the successes that we've had here in Utah. In this panel, we're going to be talking about collaboration and progress and some of the different areas in where we've seen success and collaboration with our federal partners, as well as between state and local communities. And really pleased to present this panel. To my right, I have Chris Holler. Then we have Cliff Coons, and then a familiar face, Reg Johnson, who I think also presented once before today. So we're just we're getting all our money's worth out of Reg. Really excited to talk about some of the things that we've got going on here. And what I would like to do probably is just to allow these individuals to introduce themselves first, and then after we've all introduced ourselves, we can go into their presentation. So I'm going to start with Chris. Go ahead.
I'm Chris Haller. Apparently today I'm Brian's right-hand man, so I couldn't pass that up opportunity. I've been with the Utah Division of Parks and Recreation for 29 years, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here with each of you today. And thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Cliff.
I'm Cliff Kuntz, Executive Director of Ride with Respect, 501c3 organization in Moab. That's it for now.
And everyone knows what Moab is. You say Moab and people know.
Moab is everything to everyone.
Okay, good. Excellent.
Take a page from Brian's book. I am still Reg Johnson. I'm still the Executive Director for the Utah's Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, and it's a pleasure to be here with you to discuss coordination.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So why don't we just jump right into the meat of the discussion today. I know that all of us have a little something different to present, and I can say that it's going to be somewhat similar to Monty Python, to where you say, and now for something completely different at some point in here. But we're going to start with my friend Chris, my right-hand man, Chris, I should say, and he's going to talk about some of the things he's got going on. And with that, Chris, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Director Steed. So hopefully...
Not yet. They'll pull it up.
Okay. So once again, pleasure to be here. I'm the Off-Highway Vehicle Program Coordinator, and I'm also the Recreational Trails Grant Administrator for the state of Utah. We, this year is 50 years in the making of an off-highway vehicle program. And today's focus, what I'd like to do is talk about some of those unique opportunities we've been able to secure over the last 50 years. And part of that collaboration takes place with partnerships. Most of you are very, very familiar with that. It's extremely important to touch base with your federal partners, your state and local land managing agencies. Sometimes we overlook some of those different types of agencies. Like here in the state of Utah, we have one unique agency known as SITLA. It's the State Institutional Trust Lands Administration. Each state has one, but they also, good, bad, or indifferent, people access their public lands. And so we work cooperatively with them on snowmobile grooming routes as connecting corridors, especially for a major trail system in the West known as the Great Western Trail that goes across many of the western states. Sometimes we overlook our cities or our local municipalities, and that's extremely important because they offer up a lot of mutual support and broad-based decision-making, and they are the frontline people. And so therefore, I'm a firm believer that we should not overlook the importance of those individuals on the front line. And then last, the other item, OHV clubs and associations. Those are also at the local and state level or national level. We don't want to overlook associations like Tread Lightly, the National Off-Highway Vehicle Conservation Council, and here in Utah we have well over 80 OHV clubs with approximately 4 state associations. And some of the things that we've done here out of our OHV program over the last 50 years is somewhat unique. We partner with anybody. We do not overlook any opportunity to enhance our off-highway vehicle program and foster those relationships. And so we work with the Utah Office of Tourism and local tourism offices. We have worked with Primary Children's Hospital on helmet wear initiatives and education programs. We work very, very closely with local sheriff's offices, either for search and rescue activities and or educational purposes. And then lastly, health departments. And most of you might be like, why health departments? Well, we have an education program, and it's a requirement if you're 15 years of age or younger in the state of Utah to operate an OHV on public lands. And so they've been able to help facilitate some of those education numbers for us. Planning and development, probably very extremely critical. And you want to be able to participate, and we have at that local level. We have, obviously, with PLPCO's steady hand and leadership over the years, they've formulated a statewide resource management plan, but all 29 counties in the state of Utah have an RMP. We were part of that process to try to shift that thinking of, hey, motorized trail connectivity is vitally important to the success of rural businesses and economies in the southern portion of our state and also in the northeastern portion of the state. We got some unique situations currently going on in the state between forest plan revisions, which we actively participate on with the Manti LaSalle National Forest and the Ashley National Forest. And of course, the ongoing saga, the BLM and their travel management plans. It seems like they're always travel management planning. So, and then one of the unique things that I'm very proud of to say that a former program coordinator in Fred Hayes placed in front of the program, and it's known as the 4 E's. And we try to lay our cornerstones off of those. And those 4 E's go hand in hand. So you got to engineer a trail right, which is part of the planning. You have to have it in the right environment. And then you have to educate people to do the proper things. And sometimes we don't do that, but we need to share with those individuals where to go and ride. And the last E, so to speak, in the arm of the 4 E's is enforcement. We don't generally charge out of the gate right away with enforcement, but we try to utilize that through the environment and the engineering of trails. Champion the support. Here in the state of Utah, we have a tremendous amount of support from our local elected officials and our government officials, either the legislators, representatives, county commissioners, mayors, et cetera. And I can't say enough without their support of where we would be currently with that support that they provide, both on the appropriation side of things, but through laws and rules and other types of purposes that help facilitate and really keep things very, very simple for the off-highway vehicle program. Clubs and associations, once again, I mentioned them. You want to have them be part of that partner. It doesn't always have to be Chris. It doesn't have to be members of the off-highway vehicle program. It's those volunteers that are vitally important that can share that information across the state with a consistent message. And then the agencies, which include the BLM, the Forest Service, SITLA, DWR, and many other agencies across the state. And I'd like to wrap up with be the resource. Be that person that can problem solve, because people don't call up to say, hey, how you doing today? They're usually have a problem. And so you want to be able to overcome those situations by removing obstacles that could be in our way. Technical assistance. We have a standardized sign plan across the state. We've shared that with Oregon. We've shared that with other western states. In fact, we were reached out by the state of West Virginia because of our unique way of how we disseminate laws and rules and how we keep them very simple here in Utah. So it's kind of nice to be looked at by other states across our great country. Funding assistance. On an annual basis, the program receives about $3.5 million that we turn right back around and issue that in grants to help local communities, clubs, organizations, state agencies, and federal agencies to maintain, sustain, and enhance our motorized trail system across the state. And then volunteers. We have a core of about 350 different volunteers around the state that actually wear hats, if you will, as trail hosts. So if any of you have camped in different areas, well, take that camp host and say, well, now they're on the trail. They're out there to disseminate information and provide that. One of the unique things on that volunteer thing is it's a state position, but we were able to secure funding from our federal partners, both the Forest Service and the BLM. So I think we do things very well out of the off-highway vehicle program with the state. So with that, there's my contact information. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Cliff.
Thank you, and thanks to the WGA for this opportunity to speak with the Utah DNR, including the OHV program and PLIPCO. It's an honor. So Ride with Respect aims to conserve shared use trails and their surroundings through fieldwork, education, and advocacy of responsible recreation opportunities. Primarily, we're motorcycle trail riders, but we get support from all kinds of recreation and non-recreation stakeholders. We've contributed over 20,000 hours of field work on public lands, including some pretty skilled labor at times, and we probably have collected over 20,000 photos. And so I just focused on photos from this year, which don't actually convey some of the trail work as well, but it keeps me sane. So, you know, largely our board is locals. In 2002, Dale Perriott, a motorcycle tour operator, included me as sort of offering an outside perspective, but also there's lifelong residents and even career agency staff. And we've filled in the gaps for BLM, Forest Service, Sitla. Here's a trail that was just steep straight down the fall line of the hill, and we rerouted it to be more undulating. And you know that whether it's more involved, that hill took 1,000 hours, and there was actually another 1,000 that the BLM brought, mostly from like youth corps volunteers and other forms. But it gets complicated at times. Other times it's as simple as clearing logs that the Forest Service, you know, they're lucky if they can get to half of them in a given summer, and we're happy to do it. That's a rare one that you can get volunteers to do because it's in their way until it's moved, right? But the design and the maintenance is a huge influence on the activity sustainability and the satisfaction of the OHV riders, not to mention other visitors who might use the trail. Education, you know, we're filling in the gap because there's some things specific to motorcycles in the desert that people need to know. So we get down to 9 tips, but they kind of have these realms that in that public service announcement in green, it's really based on our motto, which is in taupe, I guess. Caution, consideration, conservation. Really that boils down to respecting yourself, respecting the other people and animals out there, respecting the land itself, and everything kind of falls into place from there, we hope.
Can I interject? I'm just surprised you know the word taupe. That's great. I'm going to give you extra points for that.
For a guy who dresses like this, you wouldn't think I'd know colors. All right. So next we have possibly a 4th C in the 3C motto, and that's contribution. When you foster a sense of stewardship, you can get consistent volunteers. That trail for Sovereign ATV Loop was 20 years old, and it was by the bush, but the bush outgrew it, so we had to move the sign. It came from the OHV program as sort of seed supplies to develop Sovereign Trail System, which is like on state land. It was forestry fire state lands. Now it's mostly going to be within the Utah Raptor State Park. It has a single track, which I think is, if we improve it, it could really be attractive to more e-bikers and other non-motorized and motorcycles. And there's the ATV loop with where there's narrow trail, we have alternates to go around, so anybody in any kind of vehicle can do a loop or two out there. And I hope it becomes a real model for what the state can accomplish when they add some entrance fees to the grants that Chris's program administers. You know, I think it should only be a matter of time before the public realizes we should have the state managed sovereign trail, we should have the state cooperatively manage this well, who knows? And then we fill in the gaps with advocacy, you know, so long as there's groups pushing to limit OHV access to graded roads or the vicinity of interstate highways or other areas that are not so interesting to OHV riders, then, you know, we have to, as riders, defend our access, and that might involve participating in, you know, the designation of national monument decisions, land use bills, most recently the PLI. Almost all these slides involve something that was in the PLI bill. The very first slide actually was in Bears Ears. Now it's not in Bears Ears, but I suspect it might come and go with administrations. Who knows? It's a difficult world these days, but we you know, we try to sort of elevate the debate and really provide substantive ideas. We advocate in travel planning. This is a road on BLM land, or route in any case, that was closed for ecological reasons. I don't know if it was really necessary. Sometimes it is. But you know, it's important to really do travel planning thoroughly. And we have wins and losses. Here's one on the Forest Service that was considered for closure due to a problem with a creek crossing, but you know, it was help from the OHV program in multiple ways that helped convince the Forest Service otherwise here. One was just the grant opportunities to get a large enough culvert to cross that creek. And you know, we will play watchdog if we need to, but we prefer to play service dog with our land managers, and in either case, you know, maintain a working relationship. And so we get other forms of support from the OHV program, not just travel planning on all the different federal and state lands, but trail hosting, as Chris mentioned. Usually that's education. It could be a little maintenance, light duty, or reporting problems that the trail hosts can't fix themselves, or reporting incidences that, you know, they can't educate their way out of. It's just good to have some presence, even if it's not a law enforcement presence. You know, it, I think, encourages good behavior out there. And then the OHV program hosts these trail trainings, like this workshop in conjunction with NOVAC this year. They've had several. And the grants, you know, I need to mention because it's actually the largest source of funding for Ride with Respect monetarily, you know, aside from our volunteer hours. And then, you know, one example of little partnership with the OHV program is just in this establishment of the Fallen Peace Officer Trail to honor law enforcement officers out there. It's a four-wheel drive route that's near this single track, and that's Lieutenant Brody Young there just this past weekend, you know, turned it into something that is an annual event based around that plaque that the OHV program and DNR installed, and they actually help with the event each year. And so it's interesting with partnerships, you really don't know the direction it's going to go. It's like the sum is greater than the value of its parts. Okay, so the support hopefully has gone the other direction too. You know, I've served on the OHV Advisory Council for the OHV program for 8 years, reviewing grant applications and reviewing the rules pertaining to OHV registrations and operation. Also the Fiscal Incentive Grant Committee that they tap to get ideas for the rules that would encourage quality grant applications and projects that are open to federal, state, local agencies, OHV groups, for projects ranging from trail work, education, access protection, tourism, and even other things that help the communities like search and rescue. More recently, because at the state level, the OHV program is clearly the hub of the wheel, but locally, I have been a little envious of a county committee for non-motorized trails called Trail Mix, and so Ride with Respect helped Grand County establish this motorized trails committee, which for the last 2 years has included all forms of motorized use and land managers, and provided a single source for the commission to consult as they deal with their growing pains, the problem of success in tourism. And you know, I want to point out that our problems, you know, they're real. They're not made up, but they're all solvable when we can recognize who's gaining financially and otherwise, and have each of those parties, you know, chip in. And the sort of pie in the sky is when each entity chips in, they ought to have a say. And you know, it might start with a simple project in the field to build trust. There's no shortage of those, and you know, develop into something much larger, like our relationship with the OHV program. And I'm hoping that ultimately it develops to the OHV program's current statewide sort of roving trail crew that I think for Southeast Utah could use a dedicated one just in probably Grand and San Juan. You know, getting each of the land managers to pitch in, and then to plan the projects and the parameters. But you know, the beauty of the state taking the lead is that they work in the spring in the desert, in the mountains in the summer, and maybe the trail crew will actually have longevity, stick around, really build their skills. So that's my hope for the future. Final slide here. When each of these scales of government, along with nonprofits and businesses, you know, the federal land managers get more help when we work together. The local and state government gains more influence on the lands that surround their communities when we work together, and bottom line, we make better decisions and better implementation. So thanks for your time.
So, thanks, Cliff. And Reg, before we get to you, can I ask these guys a few questions? Do you
Yes.
mind? And Cliff, I'm gonna ask you first. I think what you've accomplished in Moab is pretty spectacular. You've developed a world-class resource in landscape that's pretty checkerboarded with multiple federal agencies, state agencies. So I'm asking you the question, what's the hardest part of being collaborative across those different types of landscapes?
Well, you know, I guess first identifying the common interests, and then seeing how we can make it work for each agency, you know, with part of the Sovereign Trail extending on Sitla property. You know, it's been the simple relationship of there's a lot of use on Sitla lands, and they're busy with non-recreation things. So as long as we're a reliable partner to deal with the on the ground for them, then they've given us a lot more latitude. But it's a big question. I wish I had, you know, a silver bullet.
Yeah. Same question for you, Chris. Let me ask you, what are the challenges of being collaborative across those federal, state, local jurisdictions?
I think probably one key word that comes to my mind, Brian, is trust. I think that sometimes we get in our own little silos and we forget that we're working with people. And sometimes that passion can cloud their judgment. And I'm a firm believer that trust can build a lot of relationships when you are trying to do good things, and by also bringing all the partners collectively together at the table, you're going to turn out a much better product in the end. And you and I have had this conversation before, is that, hey, not everybody's going to win on the left and not everybody's going to win on the right. But boy, there is a lot of middle ground to be gained and a lot of positive things that are brought forward as part of that. And so it has been challenging, but it's about trust is what I believe.
Okay. And we,
Prerequisite for sure.
yeah. And Troy's, I know he's got some questions. Can I have one more question before, oh, go ahead.
No, because it's a follow-on to the one you just asked.
Okay, go ahead.
And a number of folks have raised this, and that's, how on earth do you're cooperating across governments to get this done. The questions have been, how on earth do you cooperate between different users, between hikers, horse people?
And
Okay.
that was actually the question I was going to ask. That's good. Go ahead.
Okay, or you want to start or finish?
You go.
Okay, so to me, it's kind of like the golden rule, do unto others as they would have done unto you or something. But the complication is they're different activities, and even within the same activity, you know, some people are riding motorcycles for exercise, other people for scenery, other people for the social aspect. And so, you know, preferably people would recreate in multiple ways so they kind of understand each other, but one way or another, they need to learn the basics. You know, horses might spook, and things like that. But once we actually understand and appreciate that whether you're there for bird watching or hill climbing in the right designated areas, you know, it's a legitimate use of public lands, and that with just a little bit of consideration, you don't have to like not have fun doing what you're doing, but just keep part of your focus around somebody who might be around that blind corner. And so in that way, these uses can be far more compatible even as use levels increase.
I would probably like to share a story that might resonate quite well. In the Cedar City area on Scenic Byway 14, there's that's a natural separation between motorized and non-motorized, and this is more of a wintertime use. So kind of follow the breadcrumbs, if you will, along the path. And so we have the Cedar City Nordic Ski Club, and their costs were challenging to them because they were trying to groom non-motorized trails. We came in and offered up our snowcat. However, as a program coordinator, I cannot subsidize motorized use for non-motorized activities because it is a pay-to-play system here in Utah. And so what we did with that is that we brought them in as volunteers. They went after a trail grant through the Recreational Trails Program grant. They actually pay us. And what has that accomplished? It's created more frequency of grooming for our snowmobile trail system, and it's also built that trust again with the non-motorized community of, hey, we're here to help. We're not. We have this reputation through maybe different marketing or bad apples that fall from the tree, but we also want to be part of the solution. And so in this particular situation or story that I tell, as I share that, is that both have a common interest, both have different resources that we can capitalize and improve an area for access. And that comes in a wintertime situation. And I'm proud of those individuals down there and some of their ability to look well beyond the problem at hand and say, how do we ultimately solve this situation? So just a story that I'm proud to be a part of.
Cool. Any follow-ups, Troy, on that, or, okay. It's actually a pretty good segue. So we could talk about OHV for a very long time, and I'm imagining that there's gonna be some follow-up questions at the tail end. I don't wanna invite Reg up and not have him say anything.
That'd be great.
no.
I'm totally good with that.
You're so much more than eye candy, Reg. So much more. Reg has been in the thick of, I think, managing some of those conflicts for a long time and finding collaborative solutions to otherwise very, very difficult situations, and wanted to turn some time to him so he could discuss some of his experiences, maybe on wild horses, as a for instance.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You know, I was looking at the slides from Chris and Cliff and seriously reconsidering my career choices. But
Yeah,
because I've been dealing with a less popular thing called wild horses and burros. It's slightly contentious out there.
And can I put just 1 second? And Cliff, if I can get that picture of Brody on his motorcycle, that's a great recruitment tool. Come work for DNR, it's awesome. Yeah.
All right. As most of you know, the wild horse and burro issue is rather contentious, and Brian used the word passion earlier as he was discussing some of his things, and there's probably not another issue out there that carries more passion than the wild horse and burro issue. And we recognize that there are impacts on the lands, especially when we have herd management areas where they're 200, 300, 400, 500% over the appropriate management level. There's serious impacts to the ground. For many years, one side was pushing full implementation of the Wild Horse and Burro Act. The other side was saying, don't touch the horses at all. It just went back and forth over the congressional rider, et cetera. So at some point, Congressman Stewart, and we've been working with him for a long time, we got together and said, we've got to do it differently, because what's working or what's going on right now is not working. So how can we do something different? To everybody's credit that was invited to this group, we've all stuck together and made this work. So it's a program called the Path Forward. It consists of Humane Society of the U.S., ASPCA, Cattlemen's Association, Farm Bureau, Return to Freedom, which is a horse advocacy group, Society for Range Management, they're national folks, and all those are national folks that are joining the team. Then there was Beaver County, Utah, Elko County, Nevada, who have some serious impacts there, and state of Utah originally. And then, as I just mentioned a little earlier in the last session, Nevada has just joined us in the last few months in this effort. If you had asked me before if we would ever get these groups together and find a solution to this problem, I would have said no. There's no way. It took us nearly 2 years to draft the Path Forward, and we've started out. People were on opposite sides of the spectrum on what they wanted to see accomplished in this. We finally came together, came to a path. I can't tell you how many iterations of the Path Forward document we went through. It took a lot of negotiating. Luckily, we had the time at PLPCO to really manage that and moderate and mediate that discussion and put umpteen numbers of draft together with, I gotta say, ASPCA and the others were also integrally involved in that. It was not just a PLPCO-led effort. Long story short, we did come together with a document. We started sharing that with appropriations committees and key members in Congress who we needed their support on this. Spent about a year shopping this through Washington, D.C. We also met with Department of Interior, had discussions with them. Is this something that you can live with? It really focuses on gathers and contraception in order to bring the numbers down and get control of the situation. And we recognize that that's going to take about 15 years to implement. This is not a one and done appropriation. And so we were very open with the appropriators and very open with the Congress people that we would need their support for 10 to 15 years minimum. And they said, okay, so the first year, BLM's budget for the wild horse and burros is about $80 million. The first year we got them 20 extra million to implement this. The year after that, it was 35 million. This year, it will be significantly more. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be because it has to go through the whole process right now. Things don't get through Congress, we won't get any money more before. We have a government shutdown coming up here shortly. We'll see. But it is significantly more. And they are following the path and the guideline that we put together for how this is going to roll out. So kudos to everybody involved and for Congress to kind of following this path. But to your question earlier, Troy, how do you bring folks like this together? Relationships. Building relationships. When we first came together, there was no trust on either side. We looked at every single word. They're trying to do something here, they're trying to do something there. You know, both sides were just going back and forth, and we were in the middle trying to say, okay, what word can we use in that instead of is or the or whatever, right? So that's one. The other is balance. If you start off with a collaborative approach and you're all on one side or all on the other side, you're not going to probably come to a good solution in the middle that's lasting. The thing I would say about the path forward is we kept the balance, we developed the relationships, and it has survived a number of administrations now, from the Trump administration through from the Obama administration through the Trump administration, now into the Biden administration. That document and our messaging has not changed one bit. So neither side said, oh, we've got, you know, this administration, we're going to change and we're going to push things this way. We made a concerted effort at the front when we got the document together. No matter what the politics are, we keep the message the same. And kudos to everybody on the list that they've done that. I think that's it on the path forward. We've also got the Freeze Network that we're working with, which is another collaborative approach, which Terry Mesmer has been very involved with, and appreciate his, and that's about 70 groups that are put together, and that's kind of a sharing science group. But again, wide range of people that we're working with on this, and we'll see in the years to come, but I think we are finally making steps on the wild horse and burro issue. So with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Reg. I think this panel is supposed to end at exactly 4, so I've got a full minute. And lucky for you, I've got a full hours-long presentation. So sorry for the water guys afterwards. We're just going to keep it rolling here. Actually, I'll be short, and I'm not going to go through the slides. Thank you for bringing them up, and thank you for taking all the effort to upload them. What I will do is say they'll be available for those that want them. And Troy, I don't know how that process works, but we're happy to provide those to be available. I was going to present on the Monroe Mountain, but we've talked about that quite extensively. The governor mentioned it, and I think that many of us have mentioned that success. So I'm going to pivot just really briefly and talk about collaboration with the Forest Service through the shared stewardship initiative that we've been working on over the past, really over the past 3 years. And it's been a real game changer in our dealings with the Forest Service. And it's something that, you know, we've been able to work with the Forest Service on almost a daily basis on identifying areas that are in need of those forest treatments, and then being able to use the state as a mechanism to gather together funding resources. And then working together with the Forest Service and other partners to identify those areas that are in need of treatment, and really not being necessarily proprietary about the type of treatment that's needed. If it's a mechanical thinning, we can do that. If it's a prescribed burn, we can do that. If it's other mechanisms, we can do that as well. And ultimately, it's been a very, very fruitful conversation. One of the things that we focused on as a state specifically was on watershed areas. Many of our watersheds for our metropolitan areas are in forest lands, and those forest lands that are sometimes quite overgrown, and we all fear. I mean, from water managers on down to those that are in the city that rely on that water resource, we all fear what that catastrophic burn looks like. The Forest Service has been very forward-thinking on how to approach putting together the NEPA documents that are needed, as well as putting together a pot of funding, both state funding as well as federal funding, to put together that list of programs and projects. And as we've done so, we've been able to treat thousands of acres of forest lands. It's at its beginning years. WRI had that almost 20 years to brag on. Shared Stewardship has an equally compelling success story, but for fewer years. And we really look forward to this being a long-term partnership with the Forest Service and seeing long-term success out of that program. And I'm happy to answer offline any questions you might have for anyone that's either listening or in the room. And Reg, you can chime in on that as well because you've been part of it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. Couple things really quick on the shared stewardship and one of the challenges that we have. First is the social license to do projects. We've talked about that a little bit, about anytime you go into a forest, there's this concern that you're doing projects, that you're ruining the forest. We see that especially in the wildland-urban interface, where people have their homes or things like that. You go to cut down trees and things like that, and they really hesitate on that. If you don't do that, though, then you end up with the risk of catastrophic fire, and they're more concerned about that. The fire we had at Parley's kind of opened people's eyes locally.
And for the reference, there's it's right by Park City. It's a very inhabited area of the state, and it caught fire by a failed catalytic converter earlier this summer and dropped a bunch of very red hot particles up the freeway, and that fire was off to the races.
So, and we look at our canyons up here, we have some high fuel loads in those. I think we're finally getting to the point where we'd have that, but we could use help with that social license. Might be something that Western Governors Association can help us with. And I think that's West-wide. That's not just a Utah thing. We see it all across the West. The second thing with the shared stewardship, we need ongoing funding for that. We need some help in Congress to keep that going. The state's willing to keep putting money into that, but we need the ongoing funding. We're working with our congressional folks, but those of you that are in other states, if you could contact your congressional folks and say, yeah, it's a good program. I know many of the other states have a shared stewardship program. If you don't, it's worth looking into. So, thanks.
So, shared stewardship's great, and the Forest Service has been really great to work with on it, and we're looking forward to great things. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that might be here. I know that we're a little over time, so I'm sorry to the water panel. But I don't see any in the room. Troy, are there any burning questions online?
No, we're good.
That's easy to say. With
We
that,
answered them all.
I just wanted to say thanks so much to these panelists, and thanks so much again to WGA for paying attention to really these very important issues. None of them are easy, but all of them are important, and I'm an absolute optimist that with dedication, with the right mindset, we can actually get great things done. And I think we've seen that in the past, and we expect to see things in the future that way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.